Welcome to an episode of the Building Texas Show coming out of Garland, Texas. We're sitting at Dallas College and really focused today with YTexas on education in the state. But what I appreciate about YTexas is it's not just education. It really is bringing all layers of the economic supply chain into the room and saying, here's why y'all need to know each other. And I've seen examples today of large employers saying, I didn't know Dallas College has 130,000 students and is really where I should be working for my future workforce, where I could get management training. So many offerings.
Yeah.
And that's what I appreciate about what Ed Curtis does in just connecting people. But then beyond that connection, there's a whole bunch of people in the state of Texas that service that connection and really bring it to light. I think you're one of them as an amplifier of projects. So Joseph Kopser, thank you for joining us today and taking time being here. But Grayline Group and everything you do, where do we even start?
Yes. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I think what YTexas is doing is important. It's one thing to have economic development groups that bring companies in, which is important. We have that work both from the Texas Economic Development Council, but we also have that out of the governor's office. So that's important. But YTexas is very important for after they move here and for the existing companies that are here already, and then helping them meet. I tell audiences everywhere I go, and a lot of the work that I do at Grayline Group is around the idea that when we boil down what's most important in communities, among people and families, it comes down to three things. It's about jobs, quality jobs that are meaningful. It's about education, getting the opportunity to take your game to the next level. And then thirdly, it's your kids' future. Yeah. I mean, for those that don't even have kids, they recognize the fact that we've got to have kids. So whether it's your kids or kids in the community, we've got to be able to look out for their future. So when you combine jobs, education, or kids' future, Ed and the team at YTexas do a really great job of bringing them all together. Today's focus on education, workforce, and jobs is a perfect example of that. We've had everything from the sports industry to transportation to biomedicine to, my favorite, the reason why I'm here today is around the growing space industry in Texas. So all those opportunities are there. It's about cross-fertilizing ideas and teams, because no matter what industry you work in, you're going to need a skilled workforce to create the supply chain of customers. You're going to need a skilled workforce to be able to have places for you and your family to go enjoy when you leave, and to bring the quality of life into your home, however that be through manufacturing, shipping, like we heard from the autonomous vehicles and the autonomous vertiports. There's all kinds of cool stuff going on in Texas.
There's incredible stuff, and you have to sometimes look for it to find it, but you should be in those groups. I would encourage people to follow you on LinkedIn as an example to see a lot of the space work that's happening and those conversations and driving it forward. But to your point around the kids, I spend a lot of time in rural Texas, and you're graduating a couple hundred kids from that high school, and they're going to go somewhere.
Yeah.
And far too often they're exported.
Yes.
And they don't return. And so when I think of economic opportunity in Texas, the Texas Triangle sees a lot of it. But the rural Panhandle, rural West Texas, those are kids that I want to make sure they see that opportunity, not only in the Triangle and digitally that I've got to go and leave to get there, but we're starting to see a lot of that come back to those smaller towns. We were talking to Norman Garza earlier, and if you're a rural town with an airport infrastructure, you're prime for commercial space activity. And that could be a really great opportunity for a kid that's in 7th grade today and saying, where do I want to work? Yeah. And I just always encourage people to look at those opportunities.
Well, no, I want to double down on that. In fact, one of the most successful articles we ever did at Grayline Group talked about the mass exodus of people from rural to urban. Now, when you look at it on a global scale, for a number of reasons, that's good, because generally speaking, around the planet, not the United States, but around the planet, people living in rural areas live a lesser quality of life. Yeah. However, here in the United States, people live a phenomenal quality of life in rural America, with one exception, and you alluded to it, which is the access for high-paying jobs. And because a lot of times talent will go receive a degree, maybe they'll go into the military, and they won't return to those towns because the companies that their parents work for have closed down or moved on. Yeah. So now you have a couple things going on at once. One is this unbelievable reshoring of manufacturing in the United States, We experimented for 10, 20 years about the idea of exporting everything.
Yep.
And then when a boat turns sideways in the Suez Canal, or the ports are shut down for a strike, or just as something as worldwide, pandemic like COVID, we recognize the fragility of our supply chain. So let's make more here. That's the first great thing going for rural America, especially rural Texas. Secondly, fiber now allows you to be able to have access to the internet, the inclusion of so many satellite companies developing internet technology. You can be remote and still be connected. That's the second great thing. And then thirdly, as alluded to by a number of the panels here, autonomous technologies for delivering people, being on the ground right now, but in the air later, but also the delivery of goods and materials and supplies. You can imagine a scenario where, not too distant here in the future, you can live remotely, live the quality of life you want, and whatever you need to grow or build a business can be either provided physically by autonomous or new delivery systems, and then connection to the World Wide Web is provided by all the technologies that make it possible. So I couldn't be more bullish on the opportunity to be in places like Texas, to be able to choose the parts of the state you want to work in, because we learned, especially during COVID, very few of us are bound anymore by pure geography.
Well, and I had the opportunity and privilege to work at a co-op, and we deployed fiber into the hill country. And you talk 2018, 2019, these cities did not have access to fiber, but now they do. And they're seeing the quality of life go up. They're seeing more people move in. They're seeing remote workers can now all of a sudden live in a rural Texas town and have a high paying wealth building or just sustainable career.
My favorite example of that are all the internet coffee shops popping up in Fredericksburg and Kerrville and Bernie, which 10 years ago, you couldn't have had that.
No, and I'm seeing developments all the way out to Leakey, where people are going to live and work in Leakey, Texas, which is a wonderful place to be.
Especially if they like long and winding roads to get down there.
So it does open up a huge economy and what's possible. And that's where events like this, I think of what is that possibility? Where are we really competitive? And in Texas, I think we're competitive on the bullish attitude. We're a business-friendly state, so we're seeing growth. Now, in parts of the hill country and the state, growth is a bad word.
Yeah.
But I want to look at that back to the graduating senior that says, where am I going to go? And in city building, city conversations, you're growing or dying, right?
Yep.
Growing or not. And it all comes back down to, are you exporting all of that talent? Or is there a way for them to stay and continue to build if that's what they want to do? And I want to encourage leaders around the state and in these cities and regions that we want to be competitive to maintain the high quality of life, because the quality of life today will diminish with economic opportunities leaving.
Yeah. And I think to add to your point, I'd encourage state leaders and city and county leaders regionally to also think about the seasons of life that people are living in. So best example of that probably is my youngest daughter. So she's turning 25 this spring. She works in Dallas, has a degree in creative computing. She's drawn to Dallas by the opportunities and jobs, but frankly, and I know it's a dirty word to some folks, but not to us, she wants to live in New York City for a while. I think that's fabulous. Go live in New York City, do the city, the city that never sleeps, knock it out. Best time to do it's in your 20s anyway, when you're single and you can live in an 800 square foot apartment and think that you're living grand.
Yeah.
But when it's time to settle down or trying to raise a family and you want that community, Texas is covered in communities that are wonderful quality of life. And to your point, if they have access to the modern economy and people can not only grow and build a business, but also retain that quality of life, I think you're going to see a real change in how we look at where people choose to live. Because we cannot hollow out, especially the middle class in a lot of these small towns where you either got very wealthy people that retired back there but aren't necessarily working, or you've got people that are working low-paying jobs to work in the service industry. We really need all three. You need every bit of the economic spectrum to be in any town to make it successful.
Well, and I've had the privilege of working in Mexico and seeing over 30 years what it does to a population when you can put great opportunity out there through work, and that middle class builds, the technicians, the engineers, those come to life. And that does provide back into the economy. Your reference to the retirement communities is interesting because that's where I see the gap.
Yes.
And in that same vein, those retirees investing on the coast versus looking at what's in Texas. And I think Texas has an opportunity to be better at presenting those investment opportunities. And that doesn't happen locally. I think that happens statewide. And we draw from our big population in Texas and our pride of the state of Texas pride of how are we investing in companies that are investing in Texas?
Yeah.
And that's where I'd want to really challenge our retirees, our investor class to say, what are we doing locally at the statewide? And how does that boil down? Where is that going to make an impact? Because a long way to get here, but in Texas, I still see us competing county to county too much. And that takes away that ability to really put investment together.
Yeah. Some of the biggest achievements that the state has had in recent years, as for instance, in the 1980s, after the cycle of boom bust in the oil industry, there were a lot of people got together in Central Texas, mainly around the city of Austin, who said, can we find new industry, new sectors to bring in to buffer some of the oil and gas? They don't mind the boom cycles of oil and gas. It pays for so much in the state. But during the bust cycles, there is that exodus. So that's how they got together, working across multiple counties, and ultimately became the MCC. Yeah. And so much of the technology industry that is in Texas now happened because in the 1980s, the state working together from the governor's office all the way down, of left, right, up, down. And Army Futures Command, more recently, is another great example of working together as a state. We couldn't have done it without the University of Texas and Texas A&M working together in partnership to provide opportunities. But there's something else, though, I want to say about this idea of reinvesting in community. As we welcome more people to Texas, and it's great to have more people, more business, we need that for the economy, we need it for growth. For the people that are here and the ones moving, but we are going to need a lot more clean water, a lot more teachers, and a lot more concrete to build the infrastructure. And so if you're going to come with those three things, or else this Texas economic miracle could be on the verge of not being able to be sustained. No,
the strain on teachers alone, and now with childcare.
Yes.
Childcare is a huge conversation across the state, and it's going to take private partners to come in and help solve that. Public-private partnerships serve a wonderful place, and I think of early childcare as an element where we could find opportunity. When you look at programs like the Texas Space Commission, I see that as the state coming together, and it really does tear down those silos because Kendall County is not going to go win the Space Commission over, but we can be an element of it. And I think that makes us a global competitor when it comes to space. We were visiting with Norman Garza earlier today, and what incredible work they're doing. How do you tie into that initiative around space?
Well, I tie into the initiative around the Texas space industry in two ways. One, like I would hope for many people, which is just I was inspired by all things NASA and the space program. So I was too young to see the Apollo landing, but I was old enough to see all the space shuttle missions and to see all that take off. And I knew in the early 80s I wanted to be involved somehow. That's why when I got to West Point, I ended up being an aerospace engineer. I got to do internships at NASA. So I am a space nut from every different definition, from watching the Cosmos to Neil deGrasse Tyson to following all of it now with SpaceX and Blue Origin and Star Labs, Intuitive Machines, Firefly, the list goes on. And they're here in Texas, in our backyard. So it's so inspiring to be a part of an aspirational journey. Whether or not I make it to the moon myself or I make it into space, we'll see.
Yeah.
But who knows? But on a more practical level, I also, from my time in 20 years in the military and the last 15 or so years in the private sector, realized we have to have a workforce to build those rockets, to sustain those life support systems, to be able to build that spacecraft. And you can't just wish that away. We've learned that we can't necessarily rely on bringing, foreign countries in. Some of our foreign countries around us are acting in a nefarious way, stealing our technology. So the more we can do with American-born and American-educated workers, we're going to be successful. So that's why I'm proud to be a part of the Space Workforce Incubator for Texas, SWIFT for short.
Yep.
And so what SWIFT is trying to do is focus on just certain parts of the space industry. Right now, we're really focused on rocket building. What I mean by rocket building, not so much the design of the engineering, but physically running those pipes and tubes and chambers that hold really highly pressurized liquid oxygen, stuff that when you light it, it goes boom, but you want that boom to be controlled. That takes plumbers with great skill, electricians, welders. That takes quality control people who, and frankly, there's few places other than the oil and gas industry, the chemical industry, where you can train people to do that. So we want to work with community colleges all across the state of Texas, higher education, industry, to bring together that group of 18 to 35-year-olds and younger, quite frankly, to be able to inspire them into an opportunity to work in the space industry, physically building it, to be able to, like we're going to see here in Austin, Texas, or in the state of Texas, here on the evening of, I believe it's Saturday, March 1st.
Yeah.
We're all going to get together for a huge watch party because Firefly is going to be the second company to ever have a privately owned company land something on the moon. And that's just incredible.
The second Texas company.
Texas
company.
Yes.
And that's Intuitive Machines and Firefly really making that possible. And how inspirational that is, because when I look at how I think about space, I think of Houston, I think of NASA. And it was really eye-opening for me to go spend time with two fish at Intuitive Machines and see that, yeah, that's one path, but here's a whole different path. And it is an opportunity for a future workforce, but if you're going to be in space, you got to be ready to work.
Yeah. You know, you can look it up and verify the quote, but I believe that in a period of time, maybe it's the last 3 years, Texas has launched more people into space than anybody else. So it's a good time to be in Texas.
Well, and so where does that go? Because I think a lot of people are still trying to navigate the shift from fully public NASA into now it's dispersed commercial companies. I think there's 1,800 commercial space companies in Texas right now, and they're all doing different things, but it impacts our daily life through communications, through GPS, through all these aspects of, well, what does space mean to me?
Yeah.
Well, it's your GPS, it's your iPhone, it's everything that you're doing to communicate has an element of the space economy in it. How do we get into the workforce at an early age, whether elementary, high school, university, or vocational schools? How are you getting them in there? Because electricians and plumbers, you need them.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think what you're doing with this podcast and with the ability to reach viewers and to have more listeners know that it's there. Yeah. I tell audiences all the time when I speak publicly at a lot of events and conferences that people will be what they can see. And you're right, this is a slow journey. I mean, it was only President Obama as recently as 15 years ago or so that opened up even the idea that NASA could contract with commercially available companies and what we call dual use. And dual use meaning it's not only involved with military application, for instance, space and national security, but also could be for civilian use. When we use civilian companies like Blue Origin and SpaceX are two of the more famous, but Intuitive Machines and Firefly are going to be right there behind them. And so I think you inspire folks by conferences like this, that what YTexas is doing, connecting it to educators who then kind of have that epiphany moment. But it will take a long time if we're not more deliberate. And I believe whether it's through social media, whether it's getting into schools early, I'm very proud of what we're doing at SWIFT with the Space Workforce Incubator for Texas to be able to try to reach more students. We've been given cash grants to various rocket clubs at universities around the state of Texas because by its very nature, if you're going to build a rocket, you're going to have mistakes and there are going to be things that go boom and you're going to blow stuff up, whether it be fuel or components. And so that costs money. And so we want to provide that seed investment to be able to provide that seed, that kernel of inspiration inside of all those students to be able to get them to be inspired just like I was when I was a kid growing up.
And Governor Abbott's doubled down on that at the university level, saying we need curriculum, we need pathways, we need graduates coming out of our university systems to work in space. And I see Texas A&M, UT, all of the others kind of working to meet that mark. But it's an exciting time for what is possible, what does the future look like. But I'd encourage our Texas listeners, to think about what does that mean for their work, their kids' work. But I'd also reach into Texas investors and say, how are we privately doubling down as a state to keep it here? Because it is a competitive industry. Alabama is a big space state.
Yes.
And that might surprise some people, but it's been a big space state since the 40s and 50s.
Since Von Buren himself came over.
Yeah. And then Colorado, Utah, California, they're all investing in a similar way. I think we're on the forefront, but we really need that private follow-on to really amplify what publicly we're doing.
Yeah, and I'm happy to meet with any of your listeners who want to reach out. They can find me through LinkedIn. The email is joseph@graylinegroup.com, because this is what I do. I mean, part of what I do is help sell the dream. In fact, here at YTexas, somebody was talking earlier, you got to have not only steak, you got to have the meat and the substance of what you're building, but you got to have that sizzle that it kind of attracts people, that, you know, that aroma that makes them think, well, this could be exciting. Let me find out what it is. And you can't have one without the other. They both have to go hand in hand. And so I enjoy being a part of that storytelling, being part of that inspirational messaging that says, no, it is possible that if you really enjoy building things with your hands and you are wanting to work on cars, if you just pick up, lift, shift, and drop, you could be working on rocket engines that you can actually watch on television, not only go into the air, go into space, but as the team from Firefly is going to find out in a week or two as we're taping this, they're landing on the moon.
Yeah.
Hopefully successfully. But I mean, that's the cool part about it. Even if it's like Intuitive Machines that got there and it went clunk and it kind of tipped over, they still landed on the moon.
It's success. Success is relative, right? And that's where I think two people, we like black and white. It's easy. But what we're talking about is very much in the gray. We're still very much iterating these technologies. And that's, again, the investment of how do we get it right? Where does it play in? There's industries that haven't discovered their capability in space yet, but they're going to wake up and say, oh, this makes it so much easier.
You know, and that's, I think, another role that you play with this podcast and social media. I happened to just scroll upon a picture. It was actually the Indian government's space program that was flying their satellite or their spacecraft around the moon. And they happened to fly right over top of the Apollo 11 landing site and the Apollo 12 landing site. You're talking over 50 years ago, and it's still there.
Yeah.
That just blew me away when I saw that photo, kind of welled up with pride inside that, you know, we put it there, it's still there. And now this next generation of young talent can get into the space industry and they can put something on the moon, or even better, they'll be putting stuff on Mars.
Well, I just appreciate for the people that still say, did we go to the moon? Well, now we can definitively show you, yes.
Yes.
So let's take that off the table and say, we're going to go back.
You said it, not me. Yeah. You're exactly right.
And now we're going there, and we're actively going there for economic purposes, for continued intergalactic travel. It's going to take that iteration of technology. And sure, it was 50 or 60 years, but now we've caught up again. Now the funding is there. Now the purpose is there. So it did take that original work to iterate to a point, and it wasn't repeatable. It wasn't something that there wasn't an economic reason to go back, I guess. But now there is, and now we see it happening again. So I love what NASA inspired in our country. Kennedy inspired in our country in the space race originally. But now it's a whole different wave of private industry, private investment, matching public or exceeding public, hopefully, to really go out and create a better quality of life globally.
Yeah. Well, you see those investments when the private sector sees opportunity. So Texas-based Aptronic, they just raised $360+ million to build humanoid robotics that are powered by AI. That is going to have the opportunity to do the dull, dangerous jobs that no one else wants to do. And if you think of the opportunity, what that's going to unleash in the economy is amazing. And then there's another great dual-use technology at the time of our taping, Saronic. It's a veteran-led, military vet-led company doing autonomous underwater and above-water watercraft, those sink ships that can drive on their own autonomously. And they just raised over $600 million because people recognize there's not only a defense application for this, which means the American government will be a buyer, but there's also a private sector use in both of those examples of the humanoid robotics of Aptronics and Saronic's autonomous watercraft. And so I couldn't be happier to be in business right now in Texas. That's why I like traveling the state, coming to conferences like YTexas, meeting even more people that I didn't know were working in cool spaces. And then for me personally, I love then going back and speaking at more conferences, and it becomes a wonderful little do loop.
Well, and I'm glad you talked about dual use in this way, because DoD funded projects take time, and it's a lot of money to iterate to success. But when you can apply it commercially as well, that just takes the burden off the DoD a little bit. It doesn't make it single source. It doesn't mean that that's the only option, but it really allows the investment that DoD is making to help iterate into a quality of life product or a quality of life solution. And that might be improving how we do forestry.
Yes.
And improving how we manage water. A resource Texas could really use some support on.
Well, that's why another company I'm thrilled to be a part of, Low Coal, which is down in Bernie, Texas, Miles Murray and Petey. These two are driven by the idea that they want cleaner rivers, lakes, and streams for their kids.
Yep.
They like to hunt and fish. And so when you stereotype them, military folks like to hunt and fish, you might be pleasantly surprised to learn that they are building a clean energy company that's going to take wood waste, turn it into biochar, which will, from my business standpoint, turn money out of waste, which is the best way to do it, because your cost of goods oftentimes are zero, or worse, they were negative, or I should say better, because people are paying you to take that wood waste off their property. Would be wooden pallets, take them off their manufacturing site. And that's the creative genius that I love seeing out of so many people, because it will have a dual use capability to be able to be not just good for all the uses we just mentioned, but if you're operating forward overseas and you're having to burn things, you can burn it more cleanly and produce far less toxins. And, as we know from Iraq and Afghanistan, we have the problem with burn pits. And a company like Low Coal, co-founded right here in Texas, will be getting at that opportunity. And it's another great dual use capability.
And it's a water producer.
And it produces water.
In that process, it's essentially squeezing the water out.
Yep.
And what an initiative. And I appreciate Miles and Petey. They're two very big characters in their spaces, but that is success. That is coming back, and it's a global problem that has a really local quality of life impact. And so I'm thrilled that you mentioned them, and those are great examples of where does SBIRs play a part. So Small Business Innovation and Research for the Air Force, DoD. SBIR Advisors is a company that helps a lot of the founders I work with really pipeline into that conversation. And if you're a founder saying, how do I get to DoD? There's people like you that they should follow that are going to show them those paths, show them other founders that have done it, and then position for what does the future look like.
Well, that's what I love doing, especially on LinkedIn. That's kind of my channel of preference. And so what I highlight are opportunities of people who, and to use your point about SBIRs, my favorite example is Sustainment. Sustainment, also led by a military vet, saw the opportunity to take machine shops, which in the United States are 800,000 plus, over 80% of them are small family-owned businesses, and they are just not connected to the larger economy. But Sustainment has created kind of an Amazon platform for manufacturers to be able to go up and down the supply chain, to be able to see who has capability and capacity in their shop to help them build what they're building. And that allows us to reshore, and that allows us to make more resilience inside of our supply chain so that we're not as susceptible to shocks when they happen or strikes when they happen. But more importantly, they create jobs right here in the United States. And the fact that it's a Texas company, its first contract was an Air Force company contract up in Tinker Air Force Base, just makes me even more proud to be associated with it.
But it's back to where we started, right? On the distributed workforce, the distributed technology that now fiber and other connectivity across the internet allows. So now your machine shop in Elkins, Indiana, can really have a modern company approach, and it can take business from around the world that it never would have seen because that founder or that business owner is still waiting for somebody to walk through the door. And I want to push those industries that say, well, I can't evolve into the modern economy. Yes, you can. And there's probably somebody doing it.
Yeah.
Let's call it.
I can still see that day. It's not in the too far distant future of a distributed economy, especially in manufacturing, where, like we were talking here to the head of the Chamber of Commerce, and he was talking about the fact that they have so many old machines in these hat companies that they have here that they literally have to machine a part to repair it.
Yeah.
And with Sustainment being a partner, if they were to partner with them, when the machine part breaks, they can just dial in what they need. Sustainment will have a distributor nearby that will make it. And then with the autonomous delivery technologies also being discussed here at YTexas, I see that part being picked up and delivered. So from the time that it breaks until it's fixed, you could imagine a scenario where it's under an hour or two before it's back on the machine. And that is currently unheard of if you have a specialty machined part. And that's why I'm excited to be a part of so many of these technologies.
Well, Joseph Kopser, it's been a pleasure to sit down with you today and to have you at YTexas. Thank you for speaking at YTexas and sharing your experience with the crowd. But just to your digital audience as well,
yeah,
LinkedIn is a great place to find you. Is there anywhere else that you would direct your...
Yeah, so LinkedIn is primarily where I operate, Joseph Kopser at LinkedIn. They can follow me there. I also do quite a bit on Twitter. Okay. And then I'm also on Instagram and Facebook, but that's just more for fun and covering my travels wherever I end up. But I also do a lot of writing and blogging for an organization I lead called US Tomorrow, okay, which is looking at building jobs, education, and more opportunities for our kids. Most of my focus is here in Texas, but of course we talk about national issues where they come up.
Well, thank you so much for all the work you're doing and putting yourself out there publicly. That's a hard part of what you do. But thank you for the way that you're building Texas and the impact that you're having.
Thanks a lot for having me on the show.
Awesome.
Take care.
Thank you. Thank you for watching the Building Texas show. Be sure to follow us across all social media platforms and let us know what you like.